Hey, Happy New Year. Hope everyone had a Merry Christmas. Welcome into the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of horns247.com, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and proud Tampa Catholic graduate and only Eric Henry. Eric, how was your Christmas, my man?
Now that my body's decided to cooperate and I won't sneeze again, my Christmas has been good. For the record, I'm fine. That was just a sneeze on its own. I know those of you who have listened to the show over the past couple of weeks have heard me battling all types of things, but that was just an individual sneeze. So just for the folks at home who may be wondering, and Chip Brown himself. To your question.
I thought you were doing a little dance for us,
a little dab.
Dab.
Breaking that out from the mid-20 back when I was in college. That was a sneeze. Chip, the holidays is a great time. Great times being around loved ones as we're taping this on December 27th. So those of you may hear this in time for your New Year's. So hopefully, you have time to indulge for your New Year's Eve plans. Chip Brown and I will be together. Not quite physically together, but we'll be in the same place again for the second straight year for New Year's. Last year we were in New Orleans. This year we'll be in hot Atlanta, Georgia. Looking forward to it. Always a good time to cover a little football to kick off the new year. Chip Brown.
Oh yeah. Well, obviously, as you mentioned, E. Henry, Texas counting down to its Peach Bowl appearance. January 1st at noon Central Time against the Arizona State Sun Devils. The Sun Devils are the 4th seeded team. Texas is the 5th seeded team, yet Texas is the 2-touchdown favorite in this game. And Eric, I think you and I have both had a chance to take a look at Arizona State, and I think this is a good matchup for Texas. Now, we'll get into Cam Scadaboo, who is just an amazing story. Started his career at Sacramento State, and he gets, he transfers to Arizona State. They tell him, hey, man, we need more out of you. We need you to be more athletic. He changes his body. He becomes a 1,500-yard rusher and a 500-yard receiver. The guy's doing some incredible stuff, and he is the heart and soul of that offense, no question. He'll even run some wild scat quarterback, they call it, usually in short yardage and down in the red zone. So we will get into that. But, Eric, a couple things about Texas coming off of the win over Clemson. And I thought we've been talking about, and Steve Sarkisian's been talking about it, more importantly, because the players will listen to Steve Sarkisian, or they should, because he's the coach. But he said everyone has to elevate. Everyone has to elevate for these next 4 games as the playoff was starting. And I thought we saw some elevation. I thought we saw Quinn Ewers elevate, 11 of 14 passing in that first half. That interception is not on him. That was a drop by DeAndre Moore. But 11 of 14 passing as Texas takes a commanding 28-10 lead at halftime. Jaden Blue, 38-yard touchdown run. Then the huge cushion touchdown in the fourth quarter after Clemson had cut it from 31-10 to 31-24. Jaden Blue comes up with a 77-yard touchdown run. And Eric, it felt like the confidence tank got filled up by both those players in the win over Clemson. And that is good news if you're a Longhorn fan.
Yeah, Chip, you talk about the confidence tank. I mean, Quintravion Wiesner certainly wasn't lacking confidence. And I don't even want to say that Jaden Blue, Chip, was lacking confidence, but we've been around Blue all year, right? I don't think with Blue it was a lacking confidence thing. I think it was more of a, and I'm curious to see if you see it the same way, maybe almost a trying too hard thing, because you could tell Blue wanted it. You sensed more frustration with him when we would speak with him, excuse me, as opposed to lacking confidence. It was never a guy who seemed like he was down on himself as much as it was frustration that he knows he can perform better, and he has performed better, right? Maybe almost kind of that frustration of, man, I'm squandering my opportunity. You talked about some of the expectations for Blue entering the year, and this is the first time really in his, let's just call a spade, his athletic career, right, that he probably is not living up to expectations. You're talking about someone who's been a star his entire career, right? So how do you bounce back from adversity? How many times have you heard Steve Sarkisian talk about his team being challenged by adversity and then persevering? So, I'll put Quinn Wisner aside for a second. For Blue, I just think it was great. And that's why I asked him the question, hey, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, that 70-something, was it 77-yarder, if memory serves me correct, that touchdown against Clemson, is making sure here it was a 77-yarder. Just want to double check that. That 77-yarder, was that a season's worth of frustration being released? And he was like, yeah, I'm not gonna lie. It definitely was nice to get that one off, because that's, Chip, the type of run. And how many times have you heard me say on this podcast, I know I've said it on outlets and so on and so forth, oh, well, the 3 longest runs of the year aren't even from Texas running backs. They're from, Isaiah Bond and Ryan Wingo and Arch Manning. Well, Jaden Blue said, all right, Erica, you can wipe that one away now, right? Because those are the types of home run plays. Not saying you're going to get that every game from Jaden Blue, but you thought he's capable of it, right? And Chip, we were right next to each other in the press box. That game, I think, is crucial for Texas going forward. I wrote about it after the game that I think Texas's offense is at its fullest potential when Jaden Blue is a part. And I'm not just talking about, we're going to use him as a receiver, right, and get him, 5-6 catches, or, here's a handful of carries. Chip, that was the Jaden Blue that we expected. The guy who, if you gave him just a little bit of a crease, a little bit of a daylight, he's going to run right through that crease and go to the end zone. You saw that twice. Right. So for me, that in terms of the run game, again, Quinn Wisner, I don't want to call him established, right? Because he's still a young player in his career. This is the first time at this level that he's kind of being the guy. But for Jaden Blue, yes, that game against Clemson was huge. Again, I don't think for confidence, but just to kind of release that frustration and be like, man, I got it in me and can make it happen. So, yeah, I think that was huge for Blue. And as I said, I think this Longhorn offense, Chip, we'll talk about Gunnar Helm and some of the other guys and Quinn Ewers and, him starting to kind of round into form. But for me, this Texas offense can't reach its fullest potential without Jaden Blue being a significant factor. Doesn't have to rush for 100 yards every game, Chip, but he can't just be a guy who gets 7-8 touches and he's just a guy, just any other guy. That can't happen.
No, you saw his speed. That breakaway speed, guys can't catch him. And they were close enough where it looked like, man, they should be able to catch him, but they couldn't. He just maintained that lead that he had on those, defensive backs from Clemson and got, went the distance, 77 yards for the touchdown. That elite speed. Jaden Blue says he's the fastest guy on the team. He might have made his argument right there. But yeah, when you've got a 1-2 punch of Quinn Wisner and Jaden Blue with some Jarek Gibson mixed in, that gives you a nice, healthy, multi-dimensional running game. We mentioned Quinn Ewers ran 11 yards to convert a 3rd and 3 on that really impressive drive right before halftime that culminated with the 19-yard touchdown pass to Gunnar Helm. And with 28 seconds left on the clock to give Texas that 28-10 halftime lead, really impressive drive, I thought, from Quinn Ewers, obviously from Gunnar Helm, who we've mentioned now is the single season record holder for receptions and receiving yards by a tight end in Texas history. Huge performance from Gunnar Helm. But I want to get your thoughts on Quinn Ewers, because So much noise going into that first round of the college football playoff. My goodness. So much noise. And I thought Quinn Ewers blocked out the noise, went out there and played impressively. Had that drop by DeAndre Moore that ends up as an interception. Didn't bother him. He shrugged it off. 11 of 14 passing as Texas takes that 28-10 lead, Eric.
Yeah, Chip. I mean, this was the type of Quinn Ewers game that we've come to expect over the past, could go, 3 seasons, but for all intents and purposes, we'll just say the last 2 seasons since his redshirt sophomore year in 2023. Take a look at the QB progression. Goes 8 of 8 to start the game. Of course, that 8th one was a screen pass to Trey Wisner, went for a loss, but everything else, was classic Quinn Ewers. You get a 43-yarder to Matt Golden. You get 3 first down conversions, Wingo and Gunnar Helm. That 9th pass that you talk about was the drop by DeAndre Moore, ends up being a pick. But from there, Quinn goes, 3, 6, 9 of his next 14, 15 attempts. Just a solid game. And Chip, I was kind of batting this point around as he goes 17 of 24 for 202 and the 1 touchdown. I was kind of batting this point around in the press box that I don't know if you agree, but I thought that's the best that Quinn Ewers has looked since the Florida game, right? And I know the numbers aren't eye-popping, right? And that's without getting on too much of a tangent. Part of this, Chip, is the prism with which you want to view Quinn Ewers through, right? I self-admittedly still view Quinn through the prism of the guy who lit it up the first 3 games, because that's the standard that I quite frankly hold Quinn Ewers to. I'm not lowering the bar for him. Quinn Ewers is a talented player. He was 24/7 Sports 5-star recruit, number 1 recruit in his class, right? We're not talking about someone who I'm not going to view Quinn Ewers through the prism of, some gutsy walk-on who's just, going out there and putting things together. That's not the way I'm gonna grade Quinn Ewers. With that being said, I still think this was the best he's looked since the Florida game. You take away that pick, he looked confident, he looked healthy, was willing to scramble, was willing to move around the pocket. Chip, in my opinion, this bodes well for Texas moving forward because the turnovers are what they are. And again, we can't put that one on Quinn, but this offense as a whole has shown they'll turn the ball over at times. It's not a blip, right? We have 14 games worth of showing that inevitably somewhere down the road, there's going to be a turnover, fluky or not. But the reason I think this bodes well for Texas moving forward is just the further that Quinn is removed from these injuries, the healthier he can be, the more, and we probably have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, right? His future, a lot of it hinges on this round, and if there's a further round, and so on and so forth, right? Him really stringing those performances together, I think that bodes well for Quinn Ewers and bodes well for Texas, Chip.
Yeah, no question. It's got to keep going up. Sign of a well-coached team, sign of a championship team is week-to-week improvement. This is the time. This is, like I said, one of the most lasting images I'll have of Quinn Ewers was after that Alabama game when he's down on the field yelling, "It's time," repeatedly. It's time. And it's time to keep playing like that because if he does, then, like you said, it bodes well for Texas. And when Texas is balanced, they're a nightmare. They're just a ton to handle when they're balanced offensively and they're not suffering penalties that are putting them into bad down and distances. We had a Big Ten crew, Eric, for that first round, and they were letting them play, which made for an enjoyable football game. So not quite sure what crew will be handling the Peach Bowl, but I think that was I thought that was an enjoyable game. From a defensive, well, actually, real quick, the short yardage, 16 runs, as well as Texas ran at 292 yards, 16 runs were stuffed for 1 yard, 0 yards, or negative yards. 16 of 48. So 33%. That's a lot. Any concerns there?
Yes and no. I mean, here's the thing. Clemson, while their defense, here's what I'm saying, Chip. There are people who look at Clemson's defense this year and say it hasn't performed to the level of the Clemson defenses of years past. With that being said, it's still a unit that performed well in making plays behind the line of scrimmage, right? So it's not a major concern. You don't want to see that many. You don't want to see double-digit runs stuffed because, that's a win for the defense, right? And especially for a Texas offense that needs to be in manageable down and distance situations. You don't necessarily want to see that. Without having crunched those numbers, Chip, I'd be curious, and I could do that on the fly. After I pass it back to you. I'm curious to see the timing of those runs. In essence, were they performing well in the first half? Where did those runs kind of happen in the second half? How did they affect the game? Were some of those down the stretch, right, in the fourth quarter when Texas trying to close it out? I'm curious because I haven't looked, done a deep dive into that number. But overall, it doesn't concern me a ton just because I think we've seen Chip. Trey Wisner didn't really get a carry, if memory serves me correct, past the midway mark. I'm going to look up here the third quarter. And if there's one thing, if you want to compare the backs with Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner, Blue is someone who probably is more prone to being stuffed for some of those, 1 yard gains or no yard gains, whereas Trey Wisner doesn't fall into those. If you take a look at the breakdown, I just want to make sure I'm looking at Trey's rushing chart, and he didn't have a carry. He did not have a carry. Past the midway part of the third quarter, right? So I'd be curious, Chip, to see how many of those. I'm looking at it right now. So Trey had 1, 2, 3. Yeah, Chip. So I got to go through and do a deep dive. We'll see how many of those were assigned to each back. But Trey Wisner only had 3 of those runs that were stuffed, right? So Jaden Blue is someone who is typically more prone to ending up in that type of a situation.
Yeah. So Blue had he had one stuffed in the first quarter on 3rd and 2. They ended up picking up the 4th and 1 with Jarek Gibson. In the second quarter on first down, Quintravian Wisner. In the second quarter on 2nd and 2, Blue was stuffed for a 1 yard gain on the Clemson 18. Then on 3rd and 1, Jarek Gibson was stuffed for no gain. And then on 4th and 1, they ran the sweep that Blue was dropped for a 1 yard loss.
Right.
4th and 1 from the Clemson 17. Wisner had a 0 yard gain on 2nd and 1 in the third quarter.
Right.
Wisner on 1 yard run on 2nd and 14 in the third quarter. Arch Manning had a 0 yard gain on 2nd and 2 in the third quarter. Jarek Gibson -2 on 3rd and 2 from the Clemson 2. That's when they settled for that 22-yard field goal after having 1st and goal from the 5. That was a tough one. 1st and goal from the 5. Third quarter, 1st and 10 Blue, 0 yard run. Fourth quarter, 1st and 10 from the Texas 2. Blue was dropped for a 1 yard loss, almost a safety. And 1st and 10 from the Texas 16 Blue, 1 yard gain. Jarek Gibson, a couple of stuffed runs there in the fourth quarter.
Right.
And Arch had the bobbled snap from under center with a backup center for a 3 yard loss on 4th and 1 from the Clemson 40. So, Texas ran the ball 292 yards. Just strange that 33% of those were stuffed runs, but kudos because they were able to move the ball. They were able to score the ball. Cleaner in the first half, and credit Cade Klubnik for dropping some dimes in the passing game. They went after Malik Muhammad. They got him a couple times for 29 and 30-yard gains to help accelerate a couple of scoring drives. Any concerns there as we switch over to the defense that Malik Muhammad was. I mean, you're not going to go after Jahdae Barron, the Thorpe Award winner, but were those just great throws? I mean, it wasn't like Malik Muhammad was 3 steps behind the receiver.
Right. Chip, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to quickly acknowledge some of the comments here just so the folks know. CB, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you as well. Same thing to DRM and Jack Burton here. Jack, I'll quickly answer your question now before I come to Manny Muhammad. You asked me if I thought there'd be a 1,000-yard rusher this year. I believe that I did say that there would be a 1,000-yard rusher just because of the amount of games that you're going to play, right? We're entering game 15. So just quickly touch on that because we're talking about the run game. Chip, my thoughts on Manny Muhammad. It's life as a cornerback. It's life as a defensive back, right? Especially when you are playing the opposite side of someone who's playing the type of football that Jahdae Barron is. Someone's going to get targeted. Does not concern me to the point that you made. There were some throws that Manny Muhammad looked like he was in great position. Just a better throw by Cade Klubnik. And there is no defense for that, right? We're not talking about, let's keep this in perspective. We're not talking about some of the things we saw last year with Texas's pass defense, right? Whether it's missed tackles, allowing guys to go for yards after catch, or guys looking like they're out of position, or miscommunication. We're not seeing any of that. So I don't have any real concern with Manny Muhammad. I mean, we're talking about someone who's a great talent, right? Like I think you and I talked about it, whether it was this year or next year, there will be some point in time in Manny Muhammad's future that he's going to be an all-SEC player. I think both of us believe that. So no real concern there. Now, I will say this, and you can't get too far ahead of ourselves because Arizona State's the opponent at hand. Should Texas beat Arizona State, I'm not as threatened personally by Sam Leavitt as I was Cade Klubnik. I will say this, Chip. There's this guy who seemingly, no matter where he goes, he just balls. He just performs well, and no team wants him. I know my alma mater had him, and suddenly, there was a guy who took over as head coach, didn't want him. And I'll save the audience a rant because this is not going to be the UCF podcast, but that guy didn't want him. And then he went to Oklahoma, and suddenly they didn't want him, right? Because they had a 5-star behind him. All Dillon Gabriel does is ball. That would give me a little more concern because you want to talk about a guy, Chip, who makes a living on precision passing, extending plays with his legs similar to the way Cade Klubnik does. That's Dillon Gabriel, right? So if we're projecting ahead, I'd be a little more concerned because we're just talking about a player in Dillon Gabriel who can, I don't feel a way about saying this. Cade Klubnik, a really good quarterback. Dillon Gabriel's probably a little bit better in my mind, a notch ahead. So we're talking about someone who can do the similar things that Cade Klubnik does. That would give me a little bit of concern. But if we're taking 1 week at a time, just talking about the Peach Bowl against Arizona State, no concern for Manny Muhammad.
Yeah, I agree with Gabriel. Remembers the OU game from 2023 when he ran for over 100 yards and went right down the field after Bert Auburn gives him a lead, and with 1:17 left, and Dillon Gabriel whoop 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 right down the field, touchdown with 15 seconds left on the clock. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. Defensively, it was, impressive. The goal line stand, the different playmakers who stepped up in the goal line stand. You had, Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton on 2nd and goal. 3rd and goal, you had David Benda and Michael Taff. And then on, 4th and goal, Big Bill Norton and Baron Sorrell. Just so impressive that those guys, after a 1st and goal from the 5 situation for Clemson, to hold them to nothing, effectively ended the game because the Texas offense was able to run clock all the way down to that failed fourth down attempt by Arch at the Clemson 40. But super impressive. Obviously, Jahdae Barron looking like the Thorpe Award winner. No one's challenging him. And Michael Taff with more like, are you kidding me? Hits and plays. This defense just looks like it is putting it all together.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Chip, really quick, just sorry that the numbers, it's kind of astounding. 18,000 passing yards, 153 touchdowns, 32 picks, a career 65% completion percentage. How does that guy end up on 3 teams? And then there are a lot of programs, Chip, that are looking for quarterback play. How does that guy end up for 3 programs?
Go his
ahead.
Agent is doing a nice job, because
that is true.
He did not take a pay cut to go to Oregon.
That certainly is true. No doubt about that. And for someone whose NFL future is what it is, God bless him for getting his cheddar, his cash now. All right. To your point about Texas defense, Chip, I wrote about this after the game. The totality of that performance, whether it was the way that Texas's offense responded after the defense gave up only its second opening drive TD of the game, or the way the defense responded after giving up an opening drive TD. It's one of the things that gives me a lot of confidence in this team being a legit title contender, Chip. And I know it feels like, between the holiday and some of the, wackiness of some of these bowl games, that feels like a year ago. But we saw in the opening weekend of the college football playoff, and I'm not here to debate how many teams should be in or this, that, and the other, because there were blowouts prior to the 12-team format, right? But Chip, there were plenty of teams who very quickly looked like they were not true title contenders, right? Texas absolutely looks like one, in large part because of that defense. To talk about the goal line stands that you made, that to me is huge. Again, the resiliency. Steve Sarkisian talks about it a ton. The reason it impresses me is because, let's just go through this for a second, right? You're talking about a defense that more or less has stifled opponents all season. Opponents not named Georgia, and even Georgia, they stifled them too, right? So to really get, for all intents and purposes, get punched in the mouth for the first time this year, and to not point fingers, to not all of a sudden throw arms in the air and be like, oh, well, we don't know what's going on, to rise to the occasion when the Clemson offense drove down the field. Not say, all right, well, they're driving down the field. I guess today's not our day. No, to continue that standard. How many times have we heard Baron Sorrell and Alfred Collins and all the guys talk about red zone lockout, right? To hold that standard and keep Clemson out of the end zone, Chip, that speaks volumes to me. It really does, because there are teams, we've covered enough football, that when all of a sudden things go wrong, guys start pointing fingers. When things don't go the way they've gone all year, guys are looking at like, man, what's going on? And it's easy to just let your guard down, to let the standard down, right? But as Steve Sarkisian has said, the standard is the standard. That was very impressive to me, Chip, especially against a guy like Cade Klubnik, who's an excellent runner, who's excellent in certain short yardage scenarios. So to me, Chip, that was very impressive, major statement by that Texas defense with those goal line stands.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no question. If Texas's offense can score 30 points, Texas is going to win the game, because I know Georgia got to 30 on Texas back in October, but that was certainly with the help of turnovers, penalties. That was about the worst game Texas played. No one else has gotten more than 24, Clemson and Vanderbilt. That's it. So, and as you mentioned, dual threat quarterback, let's transition to Arizona State, because you mentioned Sam Leavitt, the redshirt freshman quarterback for Arizona State, super tough guy, put together, 200-pound kid, can run it, can throw it, started his career at Michigan State and has played really well for them. And when you combine Sam Leavitt and Cam Scadaboo, both of them as runners, that it creates issues for teams. I don't know how much of an issue for Texas, because they've been really good. They've got active, really physical defensive ends who can set an edge. You've got Anthony Hill, probably one of the best spies in college football. When he's not spying, it's Michael Taff, who's having the year of his life. And Arizona State will be without its leading receiver, Jordan Tyson, who commanded double coverage in some games, Eric. 1,000-yard receiver, 10 touchdown catches. He has a collarbone that was fractured. He's had surgery on it. He will not be available for this game. Scadaboo can catch the football, and that's where I think people don't get it. I mean, he's a 500-yard receiver. So they're going to try and get the ball to Scadaboo any way they can. They've got a couple of receivers who stepped up in the Big 12 championship game without Jordan Tyson and Xavier Guillory and Melquan Stovall. And they've got a couple of former Longhorns in that rotation, Jake Smith and Troy O'Meara. And those guys haven't gotten a lot of attention this season. Jake Smith has 9 catches, I believe, and O'Meara has 3. So Jake Smith has 6 catches, and O'Meara has 3. So not quite sure if we'll see those guys as breakout targets suddenly in this offense, but I think this is a pretty good matchup for the Texas defense. Eric, what do you think?
No, Chip, I agree with you. Let's call a spade a spade. This offense runs through Cam Scadaboo. Right? There's no two ways about that. You talk about being a good receiver. I mean, he's I believe 30-something receptions over 500 yards, right? That's an excellent.
37 catches for 506 yards and 3 touchdowns.
That's an excellent receiver. We're not talking about 37 catches for 280-something yards, which, all right, that's a guy who's catching check down and screen passes. No, we're talking about a guy who was utilized out of the backfield as a receiver, especially with the status of Jordan Tyson being what it is. And listen, Chip, we could probably go in this direction if we wanted to. You got to respect Arizona State. They're here for a reason. They earned it. I'm of the belief the Big 12 is just an island of misfit toys. That would include my UCF Knights, right? Listen, I'm not trying to.
Did you watch the UCF Arizona State game?
Yeah, I watched it.
Because that was. I mean, UCF has speed at receiver, kind of like Texas. UCF put up, 31 points?
31 points, 35-31 loss, yeah.
So that's a game that if fans want to kind of see a similar profile, even though, I'm not going to.
Yeah,
I'm not going to put UCF.
Let's be a little careful there.
But they've got some speed outside and they can run it. They ran it on Arizona State.
This is what I will say, kind of where I was going with the Big 12, Chip. When you lose to Cincy, you lose to Texas Tech. And again, listen, you can lose to teams. I'm not out to disparage those programs. And I've watched about 3/4 of the Cincy game. I'm going to watch a Texas Tech game on the flight tomorrow to Atlanta. I don't think there's anything there that those programs did that Texas can't do times 5, and I'm not sitting there saying, all right, this is going to be some 52-20 blowout, but to the original point that I was making, this offense runs through Cam Scadaboo. It's going to take, Chip, and I'm not saying he's not capable of it, but it's going to take one of those 200, plus yard games, maybe 250 total yards for this really to be a competitive game. And if that's the case, then Texas is in trouble, right? If Cam Scadaboo is getting off and doing what he does, then Texas is in trouble. But I just don't see that being the case. I don't see this defense that has performed so well this year allowing a player, specifically a running back, Chip, right? If we're talking about a quarterback, it's one thing. I don't see Texas's defense allowing a running back to take over the game in the way that Scadaboo would need to be able to take over the game in order to win.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at Arizona State's schedule and all the road games that they had going in, you can understand why they were picked to finish last in the league. They had to play at Texas Tech, at Cincinnati, at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State was the preseason favorite. They ended up dead last. at Kansas State. So, and they ended up winning, at Oklahoma State, at Kansas State, and at Arizona. They lost to Texas Tech, and they lost at Cincinnati. Texas Tech was able to keep Cam Scadaboo under wraps. And I think there were some turnovers in the Cincinnati game. But yeah, if you look at Arizona State, you can run on them. They give up explosive plays. They're not outstanding in special teams like Notre Dame or Penn State. One of those two teams has blocked like 6 kicks and 3 punts. So, there's not that, keep an eye on this, because it's keep an eye on Cam Scadaboo, like you said. I mean, they're going to use him at Wildcat quarterback. They're going to use him as a receiver, as a runner. He's the key to the whole operation. So we'll that kind of offense just hasn't had success against Texas this year. So, all right. And the other former Longhorns on the Arizona State roster, we mentioned Jake Smith and Troy O'Meara at receiver. Xavier Alford is the man. Now, he's a former Texas safety who went with Brian Carrington, who was the director of recruiting at Texas. Carrington went to USC. And so Xavier Alford went with him. Cornerbacks coach, and Xavier Alford went with him again. So Xavier Alford, first team All Big 12 safety, big time tackler. He's got 2 interceptions. He's a big time player for them. And then Zach Swanson, who was vocal about the way that Texas had his exit meeting. He's probably the number 4 defensive tackle for them. He's got a couple of sacks, a couple 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. And then Prince Dorba is also a starting defensive end for Arizona State. So you've got some guys who you might remember who are now there in that Arizona State Sun Devil uniform after leaving Texas. I think it's 6 players: Xavier Alford, Jake Smith, Troy O'Meara, Jamon Tapp, Prince Dorba, and Zach Swanson. Jamon Tapp not really in the rotation, in addition to Brian Carrington, who was the director of recruiting, is now the cornerbacks coach at Arizona State. So this will be a mini reunion, Eric, for some of these Longhorns.
Chip, I'm going to be quick here because I want to give you an opportunity to respond to a question. I think you can provide some insight there. But I'll say this. It's always interesting when you have guys, especially in this era of college football, who are with a program prior and are going to face their former program. And, none of those guys in my mind, I think, really have any in terms of like intel or this is how we do this, is how we do that. I just think they're so far removed from the program that's not going to be a factor. The Zach Swanson thing, I thought that was a little bit overblown. I'll say this. I'll say one thing in Zach's defense and one thing maybe quote unquote against him. Chip, people take rejection different ways, right? And, who knows how that exit meeting went? Only Zach Swanson and the folks at Texas know. I can understand if he wasn't particularly happy with the way the message was delivered. I would just say this. At least that message was delivered, right? Because that's just a cold, hard reality of college football. Hey, you're not going to play here. You may want to look for an opportunity elsewhere. I will say this. Zach Swanson's 19th amongst Arizona State defensive players and snaps played. So it's not exactly like he's getting a ton of run over there either. He is over 200 snaps. So I don't want to make it seem like he's just not playing at all, but he's not, he like you said, he's 4th amongst Arizona State defensive linemen in tackle. Take a look right here in terms of defensive tackles. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so fourth in snaps played, right? So he's a guy in the rotation. He's not necessarily the guy in the rotation. So take that for what it's worth. Chip, I want to give you an opportunity to answer this because I think it's an interesting question. Go ahead and throw Jose Rodriguez question here. I'll read it off. Are we a team that can afford any player to miss a game and would keep us from advancing? I feel like we're too deep for any one player affecting us, such as Isaiah Bond. Chip, your thoughts?
You know, I the first name that comes to my mind, is Anthony Hill, because he's just so freaking dynamic and covers so much ground and makes so many plays. But could Texas survive? Probably. I mean, you got Lianga Lafau, you got David Benda. You'd be super thin, but the fact that, Anthony Hill is just, he is probably the biggest reason that, or 1A, 1B, that Texas has had success against running quarterbacks, dual threat quarterbacks, because he's typically the guy assigned to spy them. So, but they've got depth, and that's a plus. Eric, what about you?
Chip, you ready for this one? And it's probably a cheap plug because I just wrote this. It's up on the site this morning. Gunnar Helm. Chip, Gunnar Helm, and listen, we've talked about him setting the single season record for receptions. What I don't think, and the reason why I wrote the piece I did today, great quotes from Kenny Dillingham and Steve Sarkisian, just how crucial he's been to the receiving game. Gunnar Helm has been the most reliable target, hauling in 84% of the targets that come his way. Quinn Ewers, who is a significantly better quarterback on play action as opposed to not play action. Gunnar Helm has been stated by both Dillingham and Steve Sarkisian as an excellent play action tight end. In the screen game, he's there. And guess what, Chip? For all of the talk of, JT Sanders being the athletic guy and Helm just kind of, being this big bruising blocker, Gunnar Helm has hauled in all 5 of his targets that have traveled 20 yards or more downfield. Gunnar Helm leads his team in yards after catch. Who knew that Gunnar Helm was the modern day Antonio Gates, the modern day, pick your athletic tight end, right? So in my mind, I'm not saying that Texas's receivers can't pick up some of that slack, but the proof is in the pudding there. He has been very valuable to this offense in the receiving game.
Yeah, no question. That's a great call. If you had to, what your biggest concern would be going into this game, Eric, for the Texas Longhorns, what would it be?
My biggest concern would be Texas falling into some of the same things that plagued them earlier this year. Let's start pre-snap penalties. Those things, getting behind the chains down in distance, those things, some of the sloppy kind of offensive line play that Steve Sarkisian referred to them as garbage sacks, some of those things. If those things were to happen, that to me, and again, it's not that Texas can't make up the ground, because like I said, the only team we've seen them falter to this year is Georgia. But if those things happen, there's nothing defensively. Like I said, if Cam Scatterbo is going to go off for 250 total yards, then that's just a great player who's taking the game over, right? And we've seen that in football history. That's not going to particularly worry me entering the game. It's really Texas beating itself, specifically on the offensive side, Chip.
Yeah, I agree. Penalties, turnovers. Really, you hate to say this, but the only team that could really derail this Texas team is Texas. I think they're complete enough to win the whole thing. And there's a reason that Texas has the best odds right now, according to FanDuel, to win the national championship. And it's because they're a complete team and they're not getting much from special teams. So kudos to the big fellas in the defensive line and the offensive line. Quinn Ewers, who we know is capable of elite play, and these running backs hanging on to the football, making plays. So, yeah, I'm with you. Penalties, turnovers would be the biggest concern because we've seen that. We've seen that get them. It got them against Vanderbilt. That game turned into an onside kick at the end when for 50 minutes of that game, Texas was in total control. But they made it a close game at the end. I think, the short yardage would be up there for me just because it's been a nagging situation. And in the red zone, he's got to figure this out. Sark has got to figure this out because I think he's got this idea with Arch Manning, but we're not seeing it yet. We've seen it. He ran for a 15-yard touchdown. He ran for a 5-yard run against Georgia. This game against Clemson, we didn't see much of anything. So I think he's got to get creative. He's got to get creative so that they finish these red zone trips with touchdowns. All right, Eric. Any other thoughts before we move on to a couple of quick basketball updates and then some take it or leave it? Any other thoughts? Bert Auburn, he's still 5 for 5 on field goals to tie or take the lead in the final 2 minutes of a football game, dating back to 2022 at Texas Tech, against Alabama that year, against OU and Kansas State last year, and against Georgia to force overtime this year. You think Sarkisian still has faith in Bert Auburn?
I do, Chip, because we haven't seen anything to show otherwise. We haven't seen Steve not send Bert Auburn out there when the situation is called for it. We can go back to last year, right? Steve Sarkisian was, I don't want to say, defiant, but was very firm in his support of Bert Auburn. So I haven't seen anything otherwise to tell me that he doesn't have faith in him. So yeah, that's definitely where I stand there.
Yeah, the only fourth down, they were 1 of 4 on fourth down. The only one that you could have sent Auburn out for was the 4th and 1 from the Clemson 17, would have been
32, 33 yarder.
Yeah. And they went for it, didn't make it. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, Auburn's been money under 40 yards, no doubt. And he's been inconsistent, we'll say, 40 to 49 yards and 0 for 2 on 50-yarders. But he can, he's delivered when it matters most at the end of a game. All right, Eric, why don't you give the folks a little update on the men's basketball team? I'll give them a little update on the women's.
Yeah, Chip, because the next time you will hear from us, Longhorns non-conference play will be finished, and it will be time for SEC play. So for Texas men's basketball, the last time they took the court, they got that win. Jordan Pope also went off for a Moody Center record 43 points. It was a game that, quite frankly, when you talk about facing a New Orleans team, and I noted this, that the average starting height, the average height of the starting lineup was 6'2". You'd have liked them to see be a little more assertive, a little sooner in the game. And I'm not saying that they needed the Jordan Pope 40-something point, outing to get the win, but there was a time in the second half where that game was a 12, 13, 14-point game, right? So still a work in progress. Probably the most notable notes, Trey Johnson did not play. Again, precautionary. Rodney Terry says it's day-to-day, as I've noted in the Insider. The belief is that if this were the team's SEC opener at Texas A&M. Trey Johnson will be good to go. I assume that Trey Johnson will get the run on the 29th against Northwestern State. Also wouldn't surprise if they choose to hold him because, quite frankly, Chip, Trey Johnson, for all he's missing right now, oh, don't worry, young man. Your workload's coming because he's going to get plenty of work come SEC play. So it wouldn't shock me if they hold him out either. And then Jason Kent, the Indiana State transfer, took part in warmups for the first time, was on the bench in warmups, but did not play. So looks like he could be near as well. But yes, Texas will face Northwestern State on the 29th before opening SEC play at Reed Arena in Texas A&M on the 4th.
Well, the Texas women, 12-1, their only loss at Notre Dame, a top 10 Notre Dame, and ran in overtime, by the way, and a veteran Notre Dame team with excellent, guard, and they were red hot in that. But Texas has handled its business since. The Texas women, they went to Richmond, a team that won its conference and won 65-54. Richmond, the Atlantic 10 reigning champion and preseason favorite. And then they hammered LaSalle. That was a chance for everybody to play. And they hammered South Dakota State, another chance for everyone to play. You had no one played more than 29 minutes. Madison Booker played, 29 minutes, but it was a lot of time for Brianna Preston and, Jordan Lee, the super talented freshman, Justice Carlton, who I think is going to be really, really good. I mean, she's already really good. She had 19 and 9 in Texas's win over South Dakota State. And we're not seeing Layla Filia, so her injury issues continue. But the Texas women will take on UT Rio Grande Valley on Sunday at 3:00 at Moody Center. And then they'll head off to Oklahoma on January 2nd. Thursday night, and that will be an excellent first SEC test. We know that OU has given Vic Schaefer some fits over the last couple of years. OU will run its offense, set it up at the free throw line, and try to use Texas's height and size against Texas because they're much more of a perimeter team. They don't have the size inside that Texas does, but that has not stopped them from beating Texas. So that will be an excellent measuring stick of where this Texas team is because they're loaded, they're deep. Rory Harmon hasn't even really been scoring the ball, but she's doing everything else: rebounds, assists, steals, and Madison Booker has been the steady go-to. But man, Justice Carlton is coming, folks. Get ready for the Justice Carlton show. If you don't have Layla Filia, Justice Carlton has certainly given you a bunch of pop. So good things appear to be in store for the Texas women's basketball team at this moment. All right, Eric.
Chip, real quick, I'll say two quick things because I happen to be at that South Dakota State game. There's a reason why you should be there's plenty of reasons why you should be following Chip Brown and listening in the Insider. But when he talked about Brianna Preston a couple weeks back being a lightning quick guard, she looked like Jaden Blue, Chip. I mean, she is fast as can be. And Layla Filia update, I happened to be on Vic Schaefer's Zoom the other day. He said he should have an update for the media about a week or so regarding if she's going to get a medical red shirt. So just throwing those last two in there.
Yeah. All right, Eric, you ready for some take it or leave it, my man?
I am absolutely ready, Chip. Let's roll right into it.
All right. Who is serving first?
I am serving first, and the first question will be, your surprise player this season has been defensive tackle Vernon Broughton. Take it or leave it, Chip.
Oh, man, this is a tough one because I think we thought there were going to be some players who were going to be good, but we didn't know they were going to be this good. And so I am going to go with Michael Taaffe because Michael Taaffe has taken his game to a whole new level. We knew he was a good player, but this, thank good for the Associated Press naming him second team All-American because that's the level of play this guy is delivering for Texas. And he's such a good leader. He's such a good story. He's a selfless teammate. I'm going to go with Michael Taaffe, Eric. How about you? So I'm going to leave it and go with Michael Taaffe.
Yeah, same. I'm going to leave it. I didn't mean to bring that down. I'm going to leave it. Vernon Broughton, while certainly having a good year, I think we all thought that Vernon Broughton was capable. I mean, we've been hearing things the offseason about Vernon Broughton stepping up. I'm going with Contravion Wisner. Again, not that we didn't hear that Trey Wisner could be a guy. I heard Tashard Choice, the Sugar Bowl rave, saying that Trey Wisner is everything, right? But the level of success, Chip, Michael Taaffe would certainly be a good choice. I'm going to go Trey Wisner on the offensive side. Yeah, I mean, to have, in essence, your third string running back go for, what could be 1,000-yard year.
37 yards he needs for 1,000.
That to me is impressive. So I'm going with Contravion Wisner, Chip.
That's a good call. All right. Take it or leave it. Number 2, Eric. Texas's offensive MVP is tight end Gunnar Helm. Take it or leave it.
I'm taking it. You heard me talk about how valuable he was in the passing game. Again, I'm not saying that the pass game would cease to exist if Gunnar Helm wasn't part of it. But, Chip, Quinn Ewers has been incredibly efficient and I don't want to say he's relied on it, but it's been, certainly a strength of his game. Those short and intermediate passes across the middle of the field, that's been Gunnar Helm territory. Just call a spade a spade. It has been Gunnar Helm territory. And you can absolutely say, Chip, and I don't say this with any hesitation, that if Gunnar Helm were not on this roster, Texas's offense would look a lot different. Again, I'm not saying that the receivers wouldn't step up and the pass game would cease to exist. But, man, Gunnar Helm has, I don't want to say carried it, but he certainly helped it a lot this year. So I'm taking it, Chip.
Yeah, I'm going to take this as well. Gunnar Helm has been unbelievable. He's been so incredibly consistent. I could make a case for Contravion Wisner, could make a case for Matthew Golden. But Gunnar Helm has been so incredibly consistent. And when Texas has needed him most is when he has stepped up the biggest. So I'm going to take this as well. All right. Take it or leave it. Number 3.
Texas's defensive MVP this year is Jahdae Barron. Take it or leave it, Chip.
I mean, this is tough. This is really tough. But I'm going to leave this. I'm going to say Anthony Hill because I think he's so dominant whatever he's doing. If he's coming off the edge, he's got the 7.5 sacks. If he's playing in the middle of the field, he's got the interception and 4 forced fumbles. But he's making so many plays behind the line. He's got 16 tackles for loss. That leads the team. The 7.5 sacks, the interception that should have been a pick 6, and then the 4 forced fumbles. I just feel like Anthony Hill makes so many plays in so many different ways that it's a tough call, but I'm going to leave this and say Anthony Hill. Eric, how about you?
Yeah, it's tough. I am going to agree with you. I'm going to leave it. Jahdae Barron, listen, he is that type of corner. He's been a shutdown corner all year long. The only reason, and it's tough because on one hand, I'm going to say that Texas's secondary, I think sum of all parts has been substantially better than it's been last year. But a large part of that is the cohesion that Jahdae Barron has with the other 5-1-2 guys in Andrew Makuba and Michael Taft, and his move out to outside corner from inside, right? So on one hand, I'm essentially disproving my point, but I think Anthony Hill as a Mike linebacker making plays behind the line of scrimmage, especially Chip, since again, Texas' pass rush has been good all year. They've hurried quarterbacks. The edge rushers haven't had as many sacks as you'd like outside of Colin Simmons. So I think he, being Anthony Hill, provides a really valuable dynamic of someone who can rush the passer and get home as the second leading player on the team in sacks and someone who makes a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. So I'm going to take Anthony Hill, but you can make a hell of a case for Jahdae Barron.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. And Eric and I will be in Atlanta. We'll try and get a podcast up before the game. We'll have obviously our recap podcast after the game. We're just getting warmed up, folks. Hope everyone had a great Christmas. Hope everyone is pumped and excited for the new year. Texas football fans sure are, I think. Although I'm not quite sure how many Texas fans are going to be in Atlanta for this game. I would imagine the Longhorns who live regionally near Atlanta will take advantage of this opportunity. I know it's a lot of travel, potentially 3 postseason trips to Atlanta if everything goes to the best case scenario. But we'll be there and we'll tell you what's going on. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Flagship Podcast. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. That's how we grow. Feel free to give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcast. That would help us with the bosses. And take advantage of the 50% off annual membership to horns247.com right now. You kidding me? There's transfer portal recruiting that's still happening. You've got the #1 recruiting class in college football, and so much coming with all the changes to college football. You don't want to miss a thing. Get over to horns247.com. That's where Eric and I will be. Until the next time, thanks again for tuning in. Stay safe and keep the faith.